The beginning of the semester was always a bittersweet time. The quiet days of summer had ended, and now everything felt rushed, like everyone was trying to get back to their routine. As I walked into the dorm building, a mix of excitement and nervousness washed over me. College had always been a whirlwind, but this year felt different. Maybe because I wasn't sure what to expect. When I opened the door to my room, I saw him, Alex, my new roommate. He was unpacking his things, his back to me. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to announce myself or wait for him to notice. The truth was, I wasn't ready to face the reality of sharing a room with someone new. I had grown used to my own space, my own thoughts, and now I had to adjust. "Hey, I'm your new roommate," I said, breaking the silence. My voice sounded weird even to me. Alex turned, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Oh, hey, I'm Alex. Glad to meet you." His voice was friendly, and there was something about the way he said it that made me feel instantly comfortable. He had an easygoing vibe, like someone who was easy to talk to. We exchanged a few casual pleasantries. He was from out of state, here to study business. He seemed pretty chill, but there was something about him that made me pause. Maybe it was his posture, the way he moved so confidently. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would get nervous or make awkward small talk like I did. As we talked, I found myself stealing glances at him more often than I should have. His laugh, his eyes, the way he brushed his hair back from his forehead, it was all so natural. It wasn't that I was actively attracted to him at first, no, it was more like there was this curiosity, a pull I couldn't explain. I'd never really thought much about guys in that way before, but something about him made it hard to look away. He didn't give off any signs that would make me think he was anything but straight. He spoke about girls in a way that felt natural, as if he had a type, as if there was no question about his sexuality. But still, something lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging feeling that maybe there was more to him than just what he said. We spent the next few days talking more, getting to know each other, discussing our classes, the new campus, and everything in between. Our conversations were always easy. I didn't feel any pressure, and I was grateful for that. But deep down, I started to wonder if maybe I was overthinking things. It felt silly. Why would a guy like him be interested in someone like me? I couldn't help but feel like I was just imagining things. Maybe I was just looking for something that wasn't there, trying to find a reason to feel something more for him. But the thing about Alex was that he made me feel seen. There was an openness in his eyes that made it impossible not to feel like I mattered. It wasn't just about the words he spoke, but the way he carried himself. He was warm, confident, and always made sure I felt included. It was so easy to fall into his orbit, so easy to let myself enjoy the conversations, the jokes, and even the silences. As the days passed, I found myself thinking about him more. The way he moved around the room, how he laughed when something funny happened, the way he seemed to always be the center of attention without even trying. He wasn't overly flashy or trying to impress anyone, he just was. I still wasn't sure what any of it meant. Was I just making a big deal out of nothing? Was I reading too much into his kindness, into the way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention? I couldn't tell. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. But the more time I spent with him, the more I felt this connection. It wasn't anything I could easily define, but it was real, and I couldn't ignore it. Maybe this year was going to be different after all. Maybe, just maybe, there was something here that I hadn't anticipated. But I wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet, not fully, at least. It wasn't until that night, as we both settled into our routines, that I started to realize that things might be far more complicated than I ever imagined. The days seemed to blur together after that. Alex and I had settled into a rhythm. He'd go off to class in the mornings, and I'd follow a similar schedule. In the evenings, we'd meet in the room, grab dinner together, or sometimes just sit and talk about anything and everything. It was easy to be around him, like we had known each other for much longer than we actually had. One evening, we were talking about our favorite music. Alex mentioned that he was really into classic rock, and I laughed, surprised. I would have never guessed. I had imagined him more as a pop guy or someone who listened to mainstream hits. But the way he talked about it, how he got into bands like Led Zeppelin and The Doors, made me realize how much depth there was to him. As we talked, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a way he'd look at me, not just in passing but like he was actually seeing me, really seeing me. It wasn't in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, but it was different than how he interacted with other people. Sometimes, when I caught his eye, he wouldn't look away immediately, and for a brief moment, there was this unspoken understanding between us. It was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed. He didn't look at anyone else like that. Maybe I was just imagining it, but it seemed like there was something more in those brief moments. That's when the confusion began to creep in. Was it just me, or was there something between us? The more time we spent together, the more my feelings started to shift. At first, I had told myself it was just friendship, that I was just getting to know him and enjoying his company. But now, it felt like there was this tension in the air, something neither of us was addressing. I caught myself thinking about him when I wasn't with him. I noticed the way his smile would linger a little longer than necessary, or the way he'd pause to listen to me when I spoke, like he genuinely cared about my opinions. Little things that would normally go unnoticed by most people, but not by me. But I wasn't sure what to do with these feelings. There was a part of me that wanted to believe he felt the same way, but then there was another part that was terrified of being wrong. I had never been in a situation like this before. The uncertainty of it all made my stomach churn with both excitement and fear. One night, we ended up talking late. It had been a long day, and both of us were tired but still too wired to sleep. The conversation shifted from the usual topics, home, school, random musings about life, to something more personal. He shared some stories about his past, about how he had struggled with relationships, with figuring out who he was. It was unexpected, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice as he spoke. "I guess I've always been kind of confused," he said quietly, staring down at his hands. "I mean, I've always liked girls. But there were times when I wasn't sure. Like I didn't really know where I fit." His words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It made sense. The small things I had noticed in the way he acted, the way he sometimes seemed a little too comfortable around me, it all made sense now. I wanted to tell him that I understood. That I wasn't judging him. But something inside me stopped me from saying anything. What if I was reading too much into it? What if he was just being open about his feelings without meaning anything more? But the more he spoke, the more I felt like I was on the edge of something. The air between us felt thicker, charged. The words were out there now, unspoken, but present. It was like we were both standing at the edge of something, unsure if we should step forward or turn back. Alex looked at me for a moment, his gaze softer than usual, almost searching. "Do you think I'm messed up?" he asked quietly. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't that I thought he was messed up. Far from it. But I knew what he was asking. Was it okay for him to feel the way he felt? Was it okay for him to question things? I wanted to reassure him, but the truth was, I didn't know what any of this meant. "No," I finally said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "You're not messed up, Alex." For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just sat there in the quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I wasn't sure if that would cross a line. Then, he smiled, just a small, shy smile, and it was like everything in the room shifted. There was a softness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. We didn't talk about it anymore that night. We just sat there, listening to the sounds of the dorm outside, letting the silence fill in the gaps. But I knew, deep down, that things had changed. There was something more between us now, something neither of us could ignore anymore. And I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to run away from it. The weeks after that night passed by quickly, but they felt different. There was a shift in the air between Alex and me, an unspoken understanding that lingered in everything we did. We were still roommates, still friends, but it was like there was something more underneath the surface, something neither of us was willing to fully acknowledge yet. It wasn't that things had become awkward, far from it. In fact, we spent even more time together than before. But now there was an underlying tension, a sense that the space between us had narrowed in a way that neither of us knew how to deal with. One night, after a long week of exams and assignments, we decided to watch a movie together. It was the kind of movie we both enjoyed, one of those late-night comedies that didn't require much thinking, just something to pass the time. We both flopped onto the couch, our usual positions, but there was something different about how we sat. Alex was closer than usual, almost brushing against me, and I could feel the warmth of his body, the faint scent of his cologne, and I had to fight the urge to tense up. Halfway through the movie, I caught him staring at me. He didn't look away when I noticed, and for a second, everything went still. My heart skipped a beat. Was he looking at me? Really looking at me? Something funny? I asked, trying to play it off, though my voice was quieter than I intended. Alex shifted slightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, just thinking about something. You're a good guy, you know. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thanks. You too. There was a pause, and then he reached over to grab the remote, his hand brushing against mine. It was just a touch, accidental, or maybe not, but it made my chest tighten. The way he looked at me afterward made me wonder if it really was accidental. The movie finished, and we both stayed there, not moving, unsure of what to say next. The quiet stretched out between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was different. There was a strange kind of comfort in it, like we were both waiting for something to happen, or maybe just trying to figure out what to do with this new tension. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask him what was going on in his head, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stayed silent, hoping that whatever this was, this feeling, would somehow make itself clear. The next morning, as we both got ready for class, I noticed Alex seemed a little more distant. He wasn't his usual easygoing self. I could see the way his hands shook ever so slightly as he grabbed his things, the way he avoided making eye contact as we talked about trivial things. I wasn't sure if I had imagined the shift or if it was something that had always been there, just waiting to surface. Maybe it was me who was making it awkward. Maybe he regretted the conversations we'd had, the closeness we'd built. But that didn't explain the look in his eyes the night before. I had to know. I couldn't go on pretending like everything was normal. I needed answers, even if they hurt. That evening, after dinner, I sat down on the couch, the same spot where we'd watched the movie. Alex was across the room, his eyes glued to his phone. I could feel the space between us, thicker than it had ever been before. Alex, I said, my voice low but steady. We need to talk. He looked up at me, his eyes guarded, like he knew exactly what was coming. Yeah, about last night, I started, but the words felt stuck in my throat. About us. There it was. The thing I'd been avoiding, the thing we'd both been avoiding. Alex set his phone down on the coffee table, his fingers tapping nervously against the edge. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was trying to find the right words. I don't know what to say, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to make things weird between us, but I also don't want to keep pretending that nothing's changed. I felt a wave of relief and anxiety hit me all at once. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged what was happening, and hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real. You feel it too? I asked, my voice barely audible. Alex nodded, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that I hadn't noticed before, something raw, something real. Yeah, I do. I'm not sure what it means yet, but I can't ignore it. I don't want to. We sat there for a long moment, just looking at each other, both of us trying to figure out what to do with all the feelings swirling between us. It felt like everything had changed in an instant, but it also felt like the start of something new. I don't know if this is the right time or if I'm just overthinking everything, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. But I don't want to keep pretending either. There's something here, something I can't ignore. I don't want to ignore it either, I said softly, my heart pounding. And in that moment, it felt like everything else faded away. The world outside, the confusion, the uncertainty, none of it mattered. All that mattered was this quiet admission, this understanding that we were both on the same page. Alex leaned forward, his eyes intense, and for a second, I thought he might say something else, but instead, he simply nodded. We'll figure it out, he said quietly. And somehow, in that quiet space between us, I believed him. The days that followed felt like they were stretched out between moments of uncertainty and clarity. There were times when I'd catch myself wondering if the conversation we had was a mistake, if we had crossed a line that was better left uncrossed. But every time I saw Alex, that worry would melt away, replaced by the unspoken connection that lingered in the air between us. Our interactions were different now, more fragile, like we were both walking on eggshells. There was no denying that things had changed, but neither of us seemed ready to take the next step. We didn't talk about what we'd confessed to each other again, not directly, at least. But it was always there, beneath the surface, a quiet tension that neither of us could ignore. One evening, after a long week of lectures and assignments, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind. The light from the desk lamp cast a warm glow in the room, and Alex was sitting across from me, his head buried in a textbook. It felt like any other night, but there was an electricity in the air that made my skin tingle. I could sense him shifting slightly, like he was about to say something, but then he'd stop, as if the words weren't quite right. Finally, he closed his book and set it aside, turning toward me. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice soft but earnest. "Can I talk to you about something?" I nodded, my heart skipping a beat. There was an urgency in his voice that I hadn't heard before. Something important was coming. "Of course," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I could feel the rush of nerves building up in me. Alex hesitated, his fingers drumming against the side of the bed. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about, and, I don't want you to think I'm rushing things or anything. I don't know how to handle this." I looked at him, my mind racing. Was he going to pull away? Was he going to tell me that everything had been a mistake? "I get it," I said softly, trying to reassure him, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring myself more than him. "It's a lot to process. I mean, we've been friends for a while, and now, well, now things are different." Alex nodded, his eyes locked on mine. "Exactly. It's different, and I don't know where this is going, but I don't want to ignore it. Not anymore." My chest tightened at his words, and for a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was so much unsaid between us, and yet, hearing him admit that he felt the same way, it was like a weight had been lifted, though a new kind of tension had taken its place. "I don't know what I'm doing either," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to keep pretending that nothing's there. I don't want to just let this fade away." For a moment, we just sat there, staring at each other, the silence between us both comforting and unbearable at the same time. And then, without warning, Alex stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the night sky. I watched him for a moment, unsure of what was happening, and then he turned back toward me, his face softer than I had ever seen it. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, for whatever this is," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I don't want to keep running from it either. I can't figure it out." I stood up slowly, my feet moving on their own as if I was being drawn toward him. When I reached him, I didn't know what to say. Words seemed insufficient, too small to cover what we were both feeling. So, instead, I took a step closer, closing the distance between us. Alex didn't pull away. He didn't look nervous or uncomfortable. Instead, he just stood there, his breath shallow, his eyes searching mine. I could feel the tension between us crackling in the air, and in that moment, I knew that everything had changed. I reached out tentatively, my hand hovering near his. He didn't flinch, didn't pull back. He just looked at me, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the same hesitation that mirrored my own. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex exhaled slowly, his hand moving to brush against mine. "I don't know. But maybe we figure it out together." His hand brushed mine again, this time lingering for a second longer than before. My heart raced as I finally let myself close the gap between us, our hands finding each other naturally, like they had always belonged together. We stood there for a long moment, just holding hands, not saying anything. But in that silence, everything felt clearer. There was no rush, no need to label what we were feeling or force anything. All that mattered was that we were there, together, with nothing more than the quiet understanding that things were different, and that was okay. "I don't know what this means yet," I said, my voice shaky, "but I know I want to find out." Alex nodded slowly, his grip tightening around my hand. "Yeah, me too." And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, we would face it together. The uncertainty, the fear, the confusion, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that we were standing on the edge of something new, something neither of us fully understood, but we were willing to explore it, step by step, together. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt hopeful. The days following that night felt both slow and fast at the same time. There was no immediate rush to change everything, instead, we took our time. It felt like we were learning how to walk on new ground, unsure of what to expect but trusting each other enough to step forward anyway. We spent more time together, but there was no pressure to define things, no hurry to put labels on what was happening. It was as if we were both savoring the uncertainty, allowing it to unfold in its own time. One evening, after a quiet dinner and some relaxed conversation, we found ourselves back in the room, sitting on the couch, not saying much but feeling the weight of each other's presence. The music playing in the background was soft, something instrumental, just enough to fill the silence without drowning it. It was the kind of night where the world outside felt far away, and all that mattered was the space we were in together. I was sitting a little closer to Alex than usual, and I could feel his warmth beside me, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. He glanced over at me, his expression soft but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," Alex said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between us. His voice had a certain edge to it, like he was carefully choosing his words. "About what we talked about before, about not knowing what this is, and I guess I'm still not sure. But I don't want to be afraid of it anymore." His words caught me off guard. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear them, I just hadn't expected him to open up like that. But it was clear that he was being honest, and for the first time, I felt a deep sense of relief. He wasn't pushing things away. He was acknowledging them, even if he didn't have all the answers. "I know what you mean," I replied, my voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot about it, too. It's confusing, and I don't know what comes next, but I don't want to hide from it either." Alex turned slightly toward me, his eyes meeting mine in a way that made my heart beat faster. There was an intensity there, but it wasn't the kind that made me feel nervous or uncomfortable. It was the kind of intensity that made me feel understood, like we were both standing in the same place, unsure of the future but certain of one thing: we didn't want to let go of this connection. "I'm glad we're talking about this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've been waiting for you to say something, to help me figure it out. But I don't want to pressure you into anything. I just don't want to leave things hanging, you know." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I didn't want things to be left unresolved either. I wanted clarity, even if it meant admitting that we didn't have everything figured out. At least we were honest with each other about that. "I don't want to leave things hanging either," I said, my heart racing. "And I don't know where this goes. But I do know that I like being with you. I like what's happening between us." The words felt like they had been waiting to come out, and once they did, it was like a weight had been lifted from my chest. I had been so afraid of saying the wrong thing, of pushing Alex away, but hearing myself say it out loud made everything feel real, like we were both finally allowing ourselves to explore this without fear. Alex smiled softly, his eyes warm. "Yeah, me too." There was a moment of silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like we were both letting the words hang in the air between us, letting them settle into something we didn't need to rush into. But as I sat there, looking at him, I could feel the shift. The shift that had been building between us, the change that had started when we first admitted our feelings, was moving us closer, step by step. And though I still didn't know exactly where this was going, I wasn't scared of the uncertainty anymore. I was ready to embrace it. We didn't kiss that night, though the temptation was there. Instead, we just sat there, side by side, letting the quiet bond between us grow a little stronger. It was enough. More than enough. In the days that followed, we continued to spend time together, each interaction feeling more natural than the last. We didn't rush to define anything, but we didn't need to. The connection was there, and every glance, every word, every touch seemed to solidify it. But there was a growing sense of awareness, a realization that things were moving forward. It wasn't just about us spending time together anymore. It was about acknowledging the depth of what we had started, about recognizing that we were on the verge of something more, something real. And then, one afternoon, after class, as we walked back to our room together, something shifted in the air. We were talking about the usual things: homework, the weather, random stories, but there was something different in the way we were talking. There was a tension building, subtle but undeniable. Our steps seemed to fall in sync, our movements becoming more attuned to each other. It was like we were both moving towards something, but neither of us was saying it out loud. When we reached our door, Alex paused, his hand on the handle, and looked at me, his expression serious. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt like the world had stopped for a second, like the universe was holding its breath. "I think I'm ready," he said, his voice low but certain. "Ready to see where this goes." I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Me too." And with that, he opened the door, stepping inside, and I followed him in. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no more fear of the unknown. We were finally ready to face it together. The door clicked shut behind us, and I knew that everything had changed. But it didn't feel like something to be scared of anymore. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. The days after that moment felt like everything was falling into place. There were no more doubts, no more hesitations. What had once been a tentative, uncertain connection had turned into something stronger, something real. We didn't rush anything, but every interaction between Alex and me was a confirmation that this was the right step. We started spending more time together, not just as roommates or friends, but as something more. There were little moments, quiet glances, touches that lingered just a second too long, that told us both this was no longer just an unspoken thing. It was something we both felt deeply, something we were both ready for. One evening, after a long day of studying, we found ourselves back in our room, just the two of us. It was one of those rare moments when the world outside felt distant and we had nothing else to worry about but each other. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the desk lamp, the rest of the apartment quiet. Alex was sitting at the edge of the bed, his eyes on me as I worked at my desk, typing up an essay. I could feel his gaze on me, warm and steady, and it was like every part of me wanted to turn and look at him, to see if he was feeling the same pull that I was. But I stayed focused, pretending I didn't notice. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I never thought we'd end up here." I paused, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. I knew exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about us being in this room together, it was about everything that had led us here. The tension, the uncertainty, the slow build of something neither of us had seen coming. I didn't either, I admitted, turning in my chair to face him. "But I'm glad we did." He smiled at that, and for a moment, I could see everything in his eyes, every thought, every feeling, everything we'd shared up until now. It was all there in that one look. "I'm glad too," he said softly. "I don't think I've ever felt this, right about something. About us." His words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. For all the moments of doubt and confusion that had come before, this was the first time I realized how much we had both needed this, how much we had both been searching for something like this without even knowing it. "You've been a part of my life for so long," I said, walking over to sit beside him on the bed, "but it feels different now. It feels like we're more. Like I know you in a way I didn't before." Alex's eyes softened, and he leaned back slightly, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." There was a long pause then, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like we were both letting the weight of everything we'd shared sink in, knowing that it had changed us both in ways we couldn't fully explain. It was more than just a shift in our relationship, it was a change in who we were, in how we saw each other, in how we saw ourselves. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Alex said after a moment, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore. I want to face it with you." I smiled, feeling my heart swell with the same certainty. "Me neither. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Alex turned to me, his expression soft, and for a moment, I thought he was going to say something more. But instead, he reached out, his hand resting gently on mine. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a promise, a reassurance that we were in this together, that no matter where life took us, we wouldn't be alone. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said quietly. And that was all we needed. There didn't need to be more words, more explanations. We were there, in that moment, fully present with each other. It was everything we needed to say, everything we needed to know. The world outside didn't matter. The future didn't matter. All that mattered was that we had found something real, something we both wanted, and we were willing to let it grow, to let it unfold in its own time. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I felt the bond between us grow stronger. We didn't have to figure everything out right away. We didn't have to know exactly what this was or what it meant. We just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And in those small, quiet moments, when we sat together on the couch, when we shared a laugh over something silly, when we held hands in the dark of the night, I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy. But with Alex, everything felt possible. The future was uncertain, but it didn't matter. Because as long as we had each other, we could face anything. And maybe that was all we needed to know.